Hello and welcome one more time. My name is Alex Centeno, and in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at how to start advertising design. So, if you're an aspiring digital media creator or a designer or a junior designer, you're starting to become a designer, and you have been tasked with creating an ad, then this is probably a good introduction to that. How do you do that? We're going to be using Photoshop today, but you could be using other software like Illustrator, for example. Um, and today we're going to be focusing in digital media as opposed to print design. And the difference is I'll try to point them out as we go, but it's important that you know that what we're going to be designing today is for digital media. For example, if you were designing something for, let's say, Instagram or Facebook, or an ad for a website, things of that nature that actually are to be consumed inside of a screen. So, if you're excited, let's take a look. All right, I am here in Photoshop and I'm going to create a new document. So all you have to do is open Photoshop as a new document, and I am going to be creating a 1920 by 1080 pixel document at 72 pixels per inch. Because it is digital media, you don't have to worry about this number at all. So the resolution, you can set it to whatever you want. The default is going to be 72, so you don't have to worry about changing that. The important numbers are going to be 1920 by 1080. Those dimensions are always going to be given to you as a designer. So they'll give you the dimensions in pixels. The first one is always going to be the width. The second one is always going to be the height. That's important. And they're going to be in pixels, and the resolution doesn't matter. The color mode is going to be RGB color mode, and the destination is going to be 8-bit. Why is this important? Because when you're designing for actual print design, then instead of RGB, you're going to be using a color mode called CMYK, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So that's an important distinction. The other distinction is that when you're printing at a high quality, for example, you're sending it to press printing or even digital printing, but a very high quality, you want to change this number of resolution to 300. That's an important distinction with digital media. In digital media, this doesn't matter. You can set it to whatever. In print design, you want to change this to a high number, like for example, 300. That's probably a good number, especially for magazine design, things of that nature. So just to recap, important things are the width and the height for us. 72 doesn't matter. And then RGB mode. I'm going to be using a white background here. Let's create our document, and here we go. I am going to be using the essentials display of tools, and I'll try to, as I go, explain a little bit of the tools that I'm using for the design. In this case, we're going to be pretending that we're designing for a hotel, and I am going to be using an image from a photographer at pexels.com. Her name is Alina K, and I'll set her Instagram handle in the description of this video below if you want to follow her. So thank you, Alina, for sharing your photography with us for the tutorial through pexels.com. So that's also a tip in itself. If you are looking for stock photography and you want to test concepts, especially if your client, for example, hasn't decided on what kind of photography they want to be using, then pexels.com is a good place to start. They have really high quality photos like the one we see here, and it allows you to test those stock photography options with your client before you actually settle on what you're going to be using. So at that point, you could be purchasing a different image or use other options. So, so here we are. All right. So the first thing is kind of settling in a general composition. In this case, it is a hotel, and we can see the beautiful ocean here. We have a boat, and we have people in a little raft there, and a couple of things there in the ocean. So the first thing is to clean our image to make it uh, perfect. A difference between taking a photo for your personal use, like things like I take a photo of my daughter when she's playing outside, things of that nature. Uh, for advertising, you want to control absolutely everything. You want to make sure that everything is the way that it needs to be. So that's where you need to start with the photography. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here to the right and convert this to a smart object. And from there, I'm going to double click. This is going to open my image as a smart object. And here, I'm going to be using a couple of tools to actually get rid of the things that I don't need from here. So I'm just going to rasterize my layer by right-clicking on top of the layer and then clicking rasterize. And then I am going to zoom in a little bit. And then here, I'm going to be selecting my spot healing brush. And then with content aware and in normal mode and sampling, I can sample this layer. I don't really need to sample all layers because I only have one layer here. But here, normal mode, the hardness at 100%, size 15 seems okay. I can also use the brackets, the square bracket and open square bracket, close square bracket to modify the size of my brush and then remove the items that I don't want from the photo. So I think they have to go too in the ref. So I'm gonna just remove the guys there. That's looking pretty good here in the rock. I think this is not super beneficial to have that there. That doesn't look too bad. That's pretty good. This doesn't look good there, so I'm just gonna remove that. And in general, it's looking pretty good, but also I wanna control a couple of things a little bit better. For example, the noise and the color. So what I'm gonna do now is that I am going to save this. And because it is in my main document, so what I did was save and then close that document, which is the smart object. And then now I am back in my main composition. And as you can see, the people are gone, the buoys are gone. And now what I'm going to do is use camera raw as a smart filter on the photo. So I'm here, I'm going to click filter, camera raw filter. That's going to bring my camera raw options here. And I'm going to start with the basic. I think the color balance seems okay for me, so I'm not going to touch this. It's just a shot. As I move here, my exposure, I can see a representation in a histogram form here at the top. So I'm keeping my eyes here as I make some adjustments here. All right, so highlights, I'm going to reduce my highlights a little bit. And my blacks, again, what I'm doing here is adjusting while I'm actually looking at what's happening here. So you can see that if I go too far, you get a red indicator here. So you don't want to go too far. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to increase my vibrancy a little bit and a little bit of the saturation, although that's pretty good already. Detail, a little bit of sharpening, and a little bit of noise reduction. You normally are going to need a little bit more of color noise reduction than regular black and white or detail noise reduction. So 35 to 40 seems to be okay. Sharpening looks pretty good like that. Here, what you're trying to do is preview things at around 100% and go back and forth between 100% and a little bit more detail, just to gauge more or less how the grain is looking. And you want that grain to look attractive. That's basically it. I could color grade, but really this is probably not a tutorial for that, although um, color grading probably would be something that you want to do based on the brand. So if the brand is very energetic, serious, let's say it has playfulness there, then you have to use colors that are going to communicate those attributes of the brand. If it's more of a toned down, place to relax, um, a more sober brand, then you would reflect those things with the color palettes as well. So in the first one, you would probably use a higher combination of colors in the color grade. In the second one, you probably would tend to use more desaturated colors and less vibrancy. So just make sure that whatever you're doing to your images in terms of color grading, you are replicating the brand attributes for the business that you're working with. Let's go to effects, add a little bit of vignetting there. That looks pretty good. Calibration seems okay. And that's looking pretty good. Let's hit OK. And let me just do before and after, so you see the difference. That's before, that's after, and you can see an enormous difference already. All right, so let's create a text layer. This is going to be your heading or your headline. And you can click on text here, or you can just press T. And here we're going to just select spot here, and we're going to say, enjoy life today. That's our headline. I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to select, let's say black for now, just so that I can see the text. And hit enter. That's looking pretty good. Because I created a square or a bounding box like this, as opposed to just typing it like that, not like that, like this, then it's going to be a type of box that it's paragraph style. And what I need is for it to be point text. So if you right click on top of the text layer, you can just go to convert to point text. And now that is going to be just one after the other. Now I can just click Control Transform, Command T on a Mac, and then resize it. All right, that's looking pretty good. Open Sans regular at 100, 134. Let's reduce this a little bit so that it's tighter there. That's looking okay, but let's do 110 so that they're not touching there. That's looking pretty good. Still, I'm not satisfied. This is just not giving me the right spacing for these lines. So I'm just going to select the two bottom lines, cut them, and I'm going to duplicate this one by holding Option and clicking and dragging. Then I'm going to paste what I had there. One more time, select the last line, Command X to copy that or to cut it. I'm going to enter out of this. And then one more time with V, I'm going to press V to do my selection tool. And then I'm going to press Option, click and drag. That duplicates my layer without having to go to the duplication here. One more time, press T, click on top, select everything with Command A, and then Command V to paste. If you need to go back in the recording and take a look at what I'm doing, feel free at any moment to just go back instead of me trying to repeat and explain everything that I'm doing. The bottom line is that if I do it all in a paragraph style, then I'm not going to have control over the spacing that well, because if I do the beginning was paragraph style, then I have to define a leading. If I do it in point text, then I can set it to a particular kind of leading that I want, but it's not going to, it's going to be consistent across lines. And then the only way that I have left is to actually separate them, and now I can control them independently. So, so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to control them separately, something along this line. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to select all of them by clicking Shift and clicking on the first one, first layer, and then Shift again to select all of them. And then I'm going to come to Color and select the color that matches my composition. Something along this looks pretty good. I'm going to hit OK. And that's looking really good. It's a little small, so while I have all of those layers selected, I'm just going to Command T one more time and then make it the size that I want. I'm clicking and dragging while pressing the Shift key, because if I actually do it without pressing the Shift key, then it distorts the aspect ratio. That is very important with typography. So make sure that you respect the aspect ratio by clicking Shift while you click and drag. And this has changed a little bit in the latest versions of Photoshop, so you might have it the opposite. If you don't press Shift, then it actually does it with respect for the aspect ratio. So just make sure that when you're clicking and dragging, you're doing respectful of the aspect ratio of the typography. Next, we're going to do something that is by far what makes the difference between a professional designer and an amateur designer. This is the big tip. If you take one thing out of this entire training, this is it. We are going to do our not only tracking, but kerning. If you haven't heard of that, then you don't have to go through the internet to try to figure out all the stuff. You can if you want. But kerning is the specific spacing between characters in a word. So I'm going to press to position myself with Command T and then just click where I am in the word. And I am going to select my option and use my cursor left and right, my arrows, to define what is the specific spacing that I want between the characters. All right, so I go one by one. The tip that I can give you to do this properly, and I see professional designers struggle with this all the time too, is imagine that you're just doing the separation between three letters at a time. So ENJ, then NJO, then JOY. And that way, by looking at those, you'll be able to better define what is the appropriate spacing between the characters. The idea is to get the spacing to look consistent, and it's not about the specifics, or in other words, it's not about the actual separation. It's more about the visual perception of the separation, if that makes sense. So don't care too much about if this one has more or less than the other one. What matters is that visually it appears as they are consistent across the letters. So obviously this one is going to have a negative space that is encapsulated here between the L and the I, that is a lot bigger because it has a lot of negative space. So there are obviously sometimes where you can't do a whole lot about it, right? Uh, that is looking pretty good like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then this one, we can do much better than that, right? That looks okay. And that looks pretty good. Okay. Uh, you could even like get away with doing it a little bit closer like that. All right. If you master uh, kerning, you're going to be just fine in the world of graphic design. I can assure you that. So just pay attention to that. All right. Next, we could add a little bit of text. I'm not going to, you know, go into the specifics, but they probably would give you more than just the title or the headline. They would probably give you a little bit of text. So I'm just going to select that text. I'm going to give it 32 point and 32 leading, and that's looking pretty good. And then finally, you would get their logo. Let's say that a logo goes kind of here. I'm just gonna do a blue box as the representation of their logo, like that. Next would be, so this is the primary styling of the advertising. So far, we've just done kind of a general template, a general way of going about doing advertising design. But we haven't exactly taken a look at the specifics of what makes this ad function for this particular brand. Uh, and obviously, we can't take a look at those today because this is just a made up brand. We don't really know what the hotel is, and we don't know what they stand for, what the brand is, what their culture, values, etc. So we wouldn't be able to make those representations. But let me just give you a couple of ideas around that concept so that you don't miss that concept when you're designing. Um, let's say that the brand concept has been defined as 4 items. I don't know, personalization, um, beauty of their golf courses. I don't know, just imagine 4 things. And so those core 4 values are everywhere you see them in the brand. And maybe you have been given a brand book to be using as part of the design that they have asked you. So that would make it even easier. But if not, then you have to make some research and look into the brand and look into what are the archetypes that they're using in their logo, what are they using on their website, and things of that nature. And identify what are the patterns, what we call the motifs of the brand. In this case, let's pretend that those are 4 concepts and they have been replicating those as an archetype of a square. If that was the case, then we have done a pretty good job so far in kind of replicating a square pattern here so far. But we could make it stronger, for example, by adding a small square here. And let's do it in white so that it looks like this white is moving into the picture a little bit, like that. And then we could give it a little bit of shadow, for example, like that. All right. So that could be a potential um, item that you would include. So why is this even important? Why am I talking about this in the first place? Because when you start the temptation is to replicate what you see online, what other designers are doing, and they don't do a good job necessarily at representing the brand or replicating the archetypes of a brand. And so they just leave it at what looks good. And that is not enough. Just doing something that looks good, that is creative, that is accepted even by the client, is just not good enough because that's not going to provide value in the long run. And particularly, you want to become a designer that brings something to the table that no other designer is bringing to the table. You want to become the sought after designer that can see through multiple layers, not just the primary layer, which is the layer where they're just hiring you to do an ad. You have to see the business behind it, and behind that is a brand, and you have to communicate with your ad the core concepts of the brand. So in this case, something small like this would make the concept of the entire ad design make sense, be cohesive with the brand itself. And so something this small would be kind of the item that ends up uniting everything else around the concept of the brand and making it powerful enough to be memorable. So in this case, I just did an example of this, but let's say that instead of like a square around the 4 items, it was a diamond. So obviously you wouldn't do a square, you would use a diamond. It doesn't have to be a diamond here. You would just incorporate it into a diamond somehow. And you would find new creative ways to incorporate the motifs of the brand inside of your advertising. All right. So finalizing a couple of things. In terms of creative design, obviously, it's not extremely complex. We've talked a little bit technical aspects of what tools to use, what the process would be of creating advertising design for the web. But let's recap a little bit. Like the first concept would be start with the proper dimensions. If it's Instagram, it's going to be square. And you probably want to go for 1080 by 1080, for example, or 1920 by 1920, then smaller. The aspect ratio is 1 for 1. So whatever that ends up being in terms of pixels, you can always make it smaller. So I would start with 1080 by 1080. If it's other media, then of course use the dimensions that they give you. The resolution is not important. Second, once you start using your document in RGB, because it's for digital media, then ideally you want to start with the brand archetypes from that point. So if you have their logo, then use their logo colors. If you have a brand book, then of course use the typography and the things that they use to replicate the motifs that they're giving you there. If you want to test some concepts, then visit pexels.com to search for some photography and some ideas of what may work for your particular client and the communication they have for that particular moment. And then start with cleaning up your images. Then continue to set up titles, headlines, and positioning of things. And then finish up with closing with important concept strengthening features or ideas, what we talked about. I hope that this has been beneficial. I don't know that there's a lot of real graphic design videos for free out there, but if you're starting your career as a graphic designer or a digital media designer, then this is kind of the path that you would follow for advertising design. I hope that this has been helpful. If you enjoyed it, please share it with someone that you love, and just like it, comment below, and if you may, just destroy the notification bell as well. All right. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.